Welcome to my video about the literature review. So I'm assuming that you have some sort of research project to do if you're watching this video, or maybe you're just curious like me. I kind of geek out on this stuff. So I hope you will enjoy the video and let's get started. Okay, so the literature review is basically one of the 5 sections of a research project. I like to start with the literature review because you need to do the research in order to write your introduction, and the literature review, we'll walk through this step by step to give you some more details into how to write a very good literature review. So let's start the research for your topic. Now, hopefully you have some idea what your topic would be. If you don't, you can go back and watch my first video about how to pick a topic. But basically, we're going to assume you already have some sort of topic or general idea. Maybe there's a specific theory or concept you're interested in. Maybe you see something in the workplace that you are curious about and you want to do more research on. Or maybe you've been assigned a topic. So whatever that is, you will go into your library and then you will put the keywords in there. So in this case, we're doing servant leadership and employee engagement because I have an interest in that. And since these are fairly popular topics, I want to look at the last year. So in your publication dates, you can poke in here 12 months. If it's something a topic that is less common, maybe followership or some type of topic that there's just not a lot of research on there yet, you may need to go back 3 or 5 years. But this will help you to figure out what the most current research is. If we looked at something that was 5 or 10 years old, chances are somebody else has already looked at it and furthered that research. So we don't want to just repeat what someone else has already done. We want to make sure that our research adds value. Now, as you do this, make sure that you check the peer-reviewed publications, because for any of your research, you want to have scholarly empirical articles that are peer-reviewed. Okay. So the big question about a literature review is, what is this research for? Why are we doing it? And the literature review provides the background for the study. It clearly explains why you want to do this research. If we are just pulling something out of the air, that's not really justification for doing the research. We need to have theoretical evidence or a foundation as to why this research is important. Okay, so remember, our topic has something to do with employee engagement and servant leadership. So in my search, I found this article, and I thought, well, this might be a really good article. It was fairly recent, and it's basically a complete meta-analysis of all the servant leadership research that's been done. And they were specifically looking to see if there was any research in the hospitality area for servant leadership. But with this, they did a pretty thorough investigation of all servant leadership. So I thought, well, this might be a good way to see what's been done and what their recommendations for future research is. So whatever your topic is, if you can find some sort of meta-analysis that's recent, that's like hitting the jackpot. If not, just look at similar articles to your topic and then see what they recommend for future research. Either way is fine. Okay, any of our research needs to have a theoretical framework. This is a must. Again, it's not just good enough that we want to do the research and we've pulled this idea out of the air. We need to have a purpose, a theoretical purpose for it. In that article that I just showed you, where they did the meta-analysis on servant leadership, they actually had this section. I just copied and pasted it, but it said theoretical contributions. And in that, they talk about the existing reviews focused on nomological networks, and that there was this gap in the hospitality industry. So their thought is future research needs to include more about the hospitality industry. It goes on to talk about to contribute to the literature and advance the research on servant leadership in the hospitality industry. This study reviewed servant leadership research in hospitality management and management literature from 1970 to 2018. So that's since the inception of servant leadership. This is a pretty thorough investigation of servant leadership. And theoretical contributions are a must. Now, we also don't want to forget practical contributions too. So when you think about your research and you're writing your literature review, also think about how will my research add to the theoretical foundation and how will it add to the practical contribution as well. Because your PhD is more than just being able to recite theories. We also want to apply it practically. So we want to find out, in this case, not just what has everybody already done about servant leadership, but how can the hospitality industry apply it to have better results? Okay, with your literature review, you want to include related concepts and theories. Now, this review was pretty in-depth. Remember, it was the totality of all servant leadership research from 1970 until 2018. So they found a lot of theories. These are the theories they had listed in their paper. This is not common in your regular research paper. Maybe in a dissertation, but your everyday research paper won't have this many theories. But obviously, servant leadership theory, we want to look at that. And then these other theories are ones that you could adapt to, because you now have a paper that says they're somehow related. And with that, you can include any of these in your research paper and talk about how they're related to your specific research. So in your literature review, you would have subsections for different theories that you're bringing into your paper. And these are theories that are somehow related and that you're going to contribute to. You're either going to add more to the field, expand it, let's say, or you're going to fill a gap. Okay. So also with your literature review, you want to look at related studies and recommendations for future research. With your related studies, let's say you did not happen upon the jackpot that I did for this video, that you didn't find somebody that had already done all the work of looking from 1970 to 2018. But you did find some papers from the past 2 or 3 years that talk about employee engagement and servant leadership. Well, you could piece those out, take a look at them, look at what they did, who they surveyed, what variables they used, what the research question and hypotheses were, and what their findings were, as well as what their recommendations for future research are. With that, you would document that in your literature review. And so you don't necessarily want to include every single article unless you are doing a meta-analysis. But you want to do enough so you have a good foundation for your study, and you're proving that each one of these previous studies are somehow related to your current study. In the paper that I showed you, that meta-analysis of servant leadership, these are some of the findings that they had. They say this suggests that further research is needed to understand employees' perceptions of their task process and so on. So these are key words. Further research is needed. Then down here, we also see future research may seek to examine the influence that CEO servant leadership has on both internal and external stakeholders. Well, that sounds like something I might be interested in. So my first research question is going to be, does servant leadership elevate engagement in internal and external stakeholders? And I can tie that back specifically to this study to say they recommended this research. I didn't just pull it out of the air. They actually said somebody needs to do this and I'm going to do it. So you would include that in your paper. There's some more in this document. Anytime they do a huge study like this, they're going to have a lot of recommendations. So they use wording like more research is needed or future studies can explore. So this is pretty common. You should see this in your empirical articles. And depending on the size of the study, you're going to find either a huge section that says recommendations for future research, or it might just be a couple of sentences in the conclusion paragraph. Either way, those are the key sentences that you're looking for, because then you can take that, put it in your literature review and say that these scholars said this needed to be done and your current study is going to do it. Okay. Control variables is another piece to the literature review. And sometimes this is overlooked or it's mismanaged. I want you to notice the citation I have here at the bottom, Carlson and Wu. They did a really great study on control variables, and I highly recommend that you take a look at this. I'll show you their findings on the next page. But basically, control variables are used in your research as a way to control, they call it nuisance variance. Basically, you want to find out, are there specific variables that may or may not influence your independent or dependent variables? So they're not truly your independent or dependent variables. A lot of times they're more of a demographic type variable like age, gender, job title, ethnicity, those sorts of things. Okay, so their findings were to adopt a conservative stance to the use of control variables. They say that adding more doesn't necessarily make it your study more rigorous. They have to have a sound reason to include them. So I can't just pull these out of the air again. I need to have a purpose in adding a control variable. And I'll show you this in a minute how to do it. With it, they also say offer a complete reporting of control variable methods, align your methods to the purpose, report the data for all your control variables, and so on. Again, I highly recommend that you take a look at this study when you do your literature review. In this case, the control variables were listed in that original meta-analysis document. And here we have a study by Payson, Wooters, and Meshalek. And they say that in order to control for confounding effects, they included gender and age. Okay, so now we have a study that's already used gender and age, and that gives us the confidence that we too can use gender and age in our study. We're not just pulling this out of the air, someone else has already done it. Now, because I also want to include something about the CEO, if you remember our research question, we want to figure out, does the servant leadership of the CEO have an effect on internal and external stakeholders? Then I want to add to this the job title, the CEO. Because if I'm doing this study and I have the maintenance man and the secretary and somebody out in the parking lot and the CEO, it's going to be hard to figure out which test results belong to who unless I have that job title there. So hopefully that helps. You want to make sure that your control variables have a purpose. Okay, so going back to our research question. A research question is very important, and some people may say that you don't need a research question for quantitative studies. I argue that you do. I think a research question is important for any study because it keeps you on track. It helps you to know what you're trying to solve for, and it helps you, it puts those guardrails up so you don't get off track. So in this case, the research question is, does servant leadership elevate engagement in internal and external stakeholders? Now, from that research question, then, we will build our hypotheses. And we want them to be very specific and scientific. They're going to include at least, at a minimum, your independent and dependent variable. Remember, we need to talk about control variables too. And depending on your study, you may include mediating or moderating variables as also. But we're going to keep it fairly simple this time. Because I want to talk about servant leadership, I'm going to use the Servant Leadership Assessment Index, and that measures 6 items: empowerment, love, humility, serving, trust, and vision. So what we're going to do is write out our first set of hypotheses with each of these 6 items. And we'll have to repeat this for every control variable. And then we'll have to repeat it because we want a set for internal stakeholders and a set for external stakeholders. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, H1A, B, C, D, E, and F. And with this, we're controlling for job title because we want to see who the CEO is and if that's going to have any impact on engagement with the stakeholders. So here you also see the 6 subscales: empowerment, love, humility, serving, trust, and vision. So what we're asking for, when controlling for job title, empowerment significantly predicts engagement with external stakeholders. So it's very scientific. I can measure for each of these items. I can measure for the control variable, that's their title. I can measure for empowerment, that's the servant leadership construct. And I can measure for engagement. And then we can also see that our participant pool is full of external stakeholders. Now you'll see that for each of the 6 independent variables here. Okay, now I'm going to just take the same set of hypotheses. You could literally copy paste. And here we go. Now we just change it to H2, A, B, C, D, E, F. And we're going to change the job title to age because that was our second control variable. And then we're going to do the same thing for gender. So you change your numbering to H3 and you change your control variable to gender. All the rest stayed the same. Now, all of these are for external stakeholders. So we'll need to just copy all this and repeat it for internal stakeholders. So in total, you'll have 6 sets of hypotheses for your study in this case. Okay, when we also do our study and you're writing your literature review, you want to make sure that you have some reason to do it. You want that significance in your study. It's not good enough to just say, I want to do the study. We need to have a purpose. So as you look through your articles, and I recommend looking at a specific time frame again. If it's a common topic, you might look within 1 to 2 years. If it's a less popular topic, you may need to expand that up to 5 years or more. And then you'll see, is your research question addressed by other empirical articles? If it is, and they give you the ideas of how to further the study or how to extend that field of study, then fine, that's what you say. According to this other study, the scholars recommended, like in this case, evaluating the employee engagement of CEOs on internal and external stakeholders. Now, if that was the plan to look at that and we couldn't find that verbiage in another study, then there's a gap. So sometimes I have students that come into my program and they have a really great idea, but they can't find any research out there that supports it. Well, it doesn't mean that it's a worthless idea. It just means that no one else has thought about it yet. So in that case, you're filling a gap. And you might say, well, does that mean they're pulling something out of the air? In some regard it is, but what they do is they do their due diligence. They go through and look at the research and they see that it's not there. So even in this current study, they looked at 1970 to 2018 and they saw that the majority of the research was not about the hospitality industry. So that was their recommendation. Fill that gap. Somebody needs to do that research. Okay. In addition to your literature review, you need to define any terms that may be ambiguous, that may be unique or rare or confusing to the audience. Anything that may be a challenge that you want clarity on. Make sure you have a section for defining terms. Now, not all studies need this, but in some cases, you may need that. So that's up to the author of the study, but just know that you can put that in there. Now, it's not a space for you to define every single term possible because you would need, a dictionary to do that. You just want to define the ones that are important to your study that the common public may not know about. Okay. Well, that is all I have for your literature review. I hope that has been easy for you. If you have any recommendations for additional topics or additional questions about the literature review or research projects in general, please reach out to me. You can contact me at drdebra@drdebradean.com. Thank you and have a great day.